The vet dropped his clipboard, fear written all over his face, because the massive German shepherd snarled, ready to attack anyone who moved. Grown men with guns backed away, terrified. But little Sophia didn't flinch. She walked straight toward the beast and did the unthinkable. What happened next made the room freeze in disbelief and changed everything. Grab your coffee and stay with me, because this rescue turned into a shocking race against time. Like the video and comment, I'm watching to see why. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day that seemed like any other for Officer James Miller and his loyal K-9 partner, Titan. Titan was known as the toughest dog in the entire precinct because he had taken down more criminals than any human officer on the force. However, this specific day was different. A call came in about a suspect fleeing into an abandoned warehouse district, which was a dangerous place full of rusty metal and collapsing floors. James turned on the sirens. He looked at Titan in the rear-view mirror. The dog was already alert, with his ears perked up, ready to do his job just like he always did. But neither of them knew that this would be the patrol that would almost end their partnership forever. When they arrived at the scene, the suspect was already running toward a high fence. Hello, my amazing friends and family. Welcome back to Vigilant Heart Tales. Before we jump deep into today's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing all your names and countries. And don't forget to check out the other stories on the channel. Tomorrow I've got another crazy one coming that I know you'll enjoy. All right, let's get into it. James shouted for him to stop, but the man ignored the command. So James pressed the button to release the back door. Titan flew out of the car like a rocket because he knew exactly what he had to do. He closed the distance in seconds. But just as Titan leaped to grab the suspect's arm, the man swung a heavy metal pipe that he had been hiding behind his back. The blow struck Titan hard on his front leg. The sound was heartbreaking. The brave dog yelped in pain, a sound that cut right through James's soul. But Titan did not let go, because his loyalty to his handler was stronger than his pain. James tackled the man a moment later and handcuffed him while shouting for backup. But his main concern was his partner. Titan was lying on the ground, whimpering and unable to stand up. This was something James had never seen before, since Titan was usually so stoic and tough. James scooped the 80-pound dog into his arms, ignoring the blood on his uniform as he rushed back to the cruiser. He knew he had to get to the vet immediately, or he might lose his best friend. The drive to the animal hospital was a blur of tears and sirens. James kept talking to Titan in the back seat, telling him to hold on and that he was a good boy. But by the time they arrived, Titan was in a state of panic. The pain was overwhelming. When dogs are in that much pain, their instinct is to protect themselves, even from the people they love. So when the vets tried to lift him onto the stretcher, Titan snapped his jaws and growled deeply, making the medical team jump back in fear. The vet, named Dr. Evans, warned James that they could not treat the dog if he was aggressive. He explained that they might have to sedate him heavily. But James argued that Titan had a weak heart condition that they monitored closely, and heavy sedation could be fatal. They were stuck in a terrible situation where the dog needed help but was too dangerous to touch. They eventually managed to get a muzzle on him after a long struggle and dragged him onto the metal examination table. Titan was thrashing and fighting every step of the way because he was confused and scared. The pain in his shattered leg was unbearable, which made his eyes go wide with terror. James stood by the door, feeling helpless because his commands were not working. Seeing his strong partner reduced to a frightened animal broke his heart. But then his phone rang. It was his wife asking if she should bring Sophia to say goodbye because James had told her it looked very bad. He thought this might be the end for Titan. James hesitated because he did not want his young daughter to see Titan like this. But Sophia and Titan had a special bond since she was a baby. Titan would sleep by her crib and guard her. So James agreed, thinking it might be the last time she saw him. 20 minutes later, the door to the exam room opened. Sophia walked in holding her favorite stuffed rabbit and wearing her small blue jacket. Her mother waited nervously by the door frame. But as soon as Sophia saw Titan on the table, She did not look at the scary muzzle or the blue cast that they had hastily wrapped around his leg to stabilize it. She only looked at his eyes. The room went silent. The two other officers and the vet watched nervously because Titan was still growling low in his throat. His muscles were tense, ready to snap at anyone who came too close. Officer James started to step forward to pull his daughter back, saying it was not safe. But Sophia just shook her head. She kept walking toward the metal table with a calm, steady pace that seemed unusual for a child her age. The vet gasped and covered his mouth. The other officer reached for his belt instinctively because they thought the dog would lunge at her face. But Sophia did not stop until she was standing right in front of the giant, injured animal. Titan stopped thrashing for a moment. He stared at her. His ears twitched as if he was trying to understand why this small human was not afraid of him like the others were. And then Sophia did something that made James want to scream, "Stop!" But his voice got stuck in his throat. She leaned in closer until her face was only inches away from the black leather muzzle. She looked deep into Titan's brown eyes, which were full of panic and pain. She whispered something so soft that nobody else in the room could hear it. But whatever she said had an immediate effect on the dog. The tension in Titan's shoulders suddenly melted away. His tail gave a tiny, weak thump against the metal table, which was the first sign of happiness he had shown since the accident. Slowly, he leaned his heavy head forward until his forehead rested gently against Sophia's forehead. The vet stood with his mouth open. Officer James felt tears running down his face because he realized that Titan was not a monster. He was just a scared boy who needed his best friend. Sophia was the only one who understood that he didn't need restraint. He needed comfort. The bond between them was so powerful that it felt like electricity was in the room. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke because they were witnessing a miracle happening right in front of them, where a little girl tamed a beast with nothing but love. However, the peace was broken when Dr. Evans cleared his throat. He said that while this was touching, they still had a major problem. Titan's leg was broken in 3 places, and the surgery he needed was extremely complex and expensive. Even if they did the surgery, there was a high chance he would never walk properly again or be a police dog. This meant the department might retire him. James felt a cold knot in his stomach because retirement for a high-drive dog like Titan often meant a decline in health and depression. Furthermore, without the department funding, the surgery would cost thousands of dollars that James simply did not have. Sophia seemed to sense the shift in the mood. She pulled back slightly to look at the vet and then at her father. She asked in a loud, clear voice if Titan was going to come home with them tonight. But James had to look away because he could not promise her that. Dr. Evans explained that they needed to make a decision quickly because the swelling was getting worse. Titan was still in a lot of pain despite the moment of calm. He suggested that perhaps the kindest thing to do, considering the severity of the injury and the heart condition, would be to let him go peacefully. Sophia's eyes went wide. She wrapped her small arms around Titan's neck, hugging him tightly, and shouted, "No, he is not going anywhere." She knew in her heart that Titan was a fighter, and she refused to give up on him. Titan seemed to agree because he let out a soft whine and nudged Sophia with his nose as if he was asking her to save him. That broke James completely. So he looked at the vet and said, "Do the surgery. Do whatever it takes, and I will figure out the money later." The vet nodded slowly. He said he would prepare the operating room, but he warned them that Titan's heart might not handle the anesthesia. It was a huge risk, but James looked at his daughter and his dog and knew he had no other choice. As they prepared to wheel Titan away, Sophia whispered one last thing to the dog and patted his blue cast gently. Titan watched her leave the room with eyes that looked hopeful for the first time that day. James walked his family to the waiting room and sat down with his head in his hands, praying that he had made the right decision. But as the hours ticked by and the surgery went longer than expected, the atmosphere in the waiting room grew heavy and quiet. Suddenly, the double doors swung open. Dr. Evans walked out with a surgical mask hanging around his neck and a look on his face that James could not read. James stood up, his heart pounding in his chest, asking if Titan was okay. The vet took a deep breath. He looked at Sophia, and then at James. He said that something unexpected had happened during surgery, something they had not seen on the initial x-rays. It changed the entire situation completely. James felt his knees go weak because he assumed the worst. But before he could ask what was wrong, the vet explained that while they were fixing the bone, they found something lodged deep in the muscle tissue near the break, something that should not have been there. When they pulled it out, they realized that Titan had been carrying a secret for a long time. The vet reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal object. He held it up to the light. James squinted to see what it was. When he realized what he was looking at, his jaw dropped, because it was a piece of an old bullet. It was from a case that had gone cold 5 years ago, a case involving a missing child that was never found. The realization hit James like a freight train. Titan had not just been injured today. He had been hurt years ago and never made a sound. This old bullet was the key to solving the biggest mystery in the town's history. But just as James was processing this shock, the alarms in the surgery room behind the doors started beeping loudly. A nurse rushed out, shouting that Titan's heart was stopping. James felt his own heart stop beating the moment the nurse screamed that warning, because the sound of the flatline monitor was a high-pitched drone that filled the hallway even through the closed doors. Although Dr. Evans had already been exhausted from the long surgery, he spun around on his heels and rushed back into the operating room without saying a word to James or Sophia. The double doors swung shut, blocking their view, but the panic in the room was impossible to hide. James grabbed Sophia's hand tightly because he wanted to shield her from the reality that her best friend might be dying right there on the table. But Sophia did not pull away or cry. Instead, she pressed her face against the small glass window of the swinging door, watching the blur of blue scrubs moving frantically around the large dog. Inside the room, Dr. Evans was shouting clear commands to his team while he pressed his hands against Titan's chest to manually pump the dog's heart. It was a chaotic scene, yet there was a desperate focus to it because everyone in that room knew that this dog was a hero. James felt a heavy lump form in his throat as he watched the vet work, remembering how Titan had saved him countless times on the street. But now James could do absolutely nothing to save him. Minutes felt like hours as the team worked, and James was just about to pull Sophia away and tell her it was over when suddenly the frantic movement inside the room stopped. Dr. Evans straightened up and looked at the monitor, and although James could not hear the sound from out in the hall, he saw the vet's shoulders sag in relief and the nurse wiped sweat from her forehead. A moment later, Dr. Evans came out through the doors, pulling his mask down to reveal a face that was pale and tired, but he managed a small, weary smile. He told them that they had lost Titan for a full minute, but his heart had started beating again on its own, which was nothing short of a miracle considering the trauma his body had been through. However, he warned them that Titan was in a deep coma, and the next 24 hours were critical because his body was incredibly weak. Sophia let out a breath she had been holding and asked if she could sit with him. Dr. Evans hesitated because it was against protocol to have children in the recovery area, but after seeing the bond they shared earlier, he simply nodded and held the door open. They moved Titan to a small recovery room with dim lights and soft blankets. James lifted Sophia onto a chair next to the metal cage where Titan lay sleeping, his chest rising and falling with a shallow rhythm that was painful to watch, while Sophia began to softly hum a lullaby to the unconscious dog. James signaled for Dr. Evans to step into the hallway because they needed to discuss the other shocking discovery. The vet reached into his pocket and pulled out the plastic bag containing the old, deformed bullet. James took it in his hand, feeling the weight of the cold metal, and a chill went down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He recognized the caliber immediately. It was a small .38 slug, the kind used in older revolvers. Dr. Evans explained that the scar tissue around the bullet suggested it had been there for at least 5 years, which meant Titan had been shot long before he ever joined the police force. This information hit James hard because 5 years ago, Titan was just a stray dog found wandering near the edge of the murky swamp on the outskirts of town. James remembered the day the animal control officer brought him in. Titan had been skinny, terrified, and limping, but everyone assumed he had been hit by a car or caught in a fence. No one ever suspected that the stray dog had survived a gunshot wound. But what made James feel sick to his stomach was the connection to the case he had been working on back then. 5 years ago, a little girl named Sarah had vanished from her backyard, which was only 2 miles from where Titan was found. The police had searched the swamp for weeks, but they never found a trace of her, and the case eventually went cold, leaving a hole in the community and a broken family behind. James looked at the bullet and then back at the sleeping dog, and the realization washed over him like a wave. Titan hadn't just been a stray wandering the woods. He had likely been there when Sarah was taken. He might have even tried to stop it, which was why he was shot. The dog had been a witness to the town's darkest mystery this whole time, carrying the evidence inside his own body. James knew he had to act fast because if this bullet was indeed from a weapon that took Sarah, then the person who shot Titan was still out there, and they might be closer than anyone realized. James told Dr. Evans to keep a close watch on Titan and not to let anyone else in the room except Sophia. Then he walked out to the parking lot and dialed his captain. His hands were shaking as he explained the situation, telling his boss to pull the old evidence files from the Sarah kidnapping immediately. The captain was skeptical at first, asking how a dog surgery could possibly reopen a 5-year-old cold case. But when James mentioned the caliber of the bullet and the location where Titan was found, the line went silent. The captain ordered James to bring the bullet to forensics right away. James rushed to the station, his mind racing with possibilities. When he arrived, the forensics team was waiting. They took the bullet and placed it under the microscope, while James paced back and forth in the lab, drinking stale coffee and praying for a match. It took 3 hours, but finally, the ballistics expert turned around with a look of shock on his face. He told James that the striations on the bullet were a perfect match to a gun that had been confiscated just this morning. James froze. The only gun confiscated this morning was from the suspect he had arrested at the warehouse, the man who had broken Titan's leg with a pipe. James felt a surge of rage, so hot it almost blinded him. The man sitting in the holding cell downstairs wasn't just a thief. He was the man who had shot Titan 5 years ago, and he was likely the man who had taken Sarah. James stormed down the stairs to the interrogation room, ignoring the other officers who tried to ask him what was wrong. He slammed the door open and threw the photo of the bullet onto the metal table in front of the suspect, a man with greasy hair and a jagged scar on his chin. The man looked at the photo and laughed nervously, claiming he didn't know what that was. James leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous, and told him that they pulled that bullet out of the dog he tried to kill today. He explained that ballistics had already matched it to the gun found in the suspect's waistband. The man's smile faded instantly, and beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. James pressed harder, asking him where Sarah was. The man stayed silent, staring at the table, refusing to speak. But James noticed the man's eyes darting to a small, dirty notebook that had been taken from his pocket and placed in the evidence bag on the counter. James grabbed the bag and ripped it open, flipping through the pages. It was full of incoherent scribbles and numbers. But on the very last page, there was a drawing of a cabin with a large oak tree in front of it, and underneath the drawing were coordinates. James knew that area. It was deep in the swamp, a place where nobody went because the ground was unstable and the bugs were unbearable. Without saying another word, James ran out of the room, leaving the suspect trembling in his chair. He called for backup, but he knew he couldn't wait for the SWAT team to assemble. If Sarah was still alive, or if there was evidence at that cabin, he needed to get there now. He drove his cruiser toward the swamp, the engine roaring as he pushed the car to its limit. Meanwhile, back at the vet clinic, something incredible was happening. Sophia had fallen asleep with her head on the metal table next to Titan's paw. The room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Suddenly, Titan's nose twitched, his eyelids fluttered, and he let out a low, raspy whine. Sophia woke up instantly, rubbing her eyes. She saw Titan trying to lift his head, But he was too weak. She whispered to him, telling him to rest. But Titan was agitated. He was sniffing the air frantically, and his eyes were wide with a look of urgency that Sophia had never seen before. It wasn't pain, it was recognition. Titan could smell something on Sophia's jacket, the scent of the swamp water from when James had hugged her earlier after leaving the station. Titan began to bark, a weak but persistent sound that made the alarms on the monitor spike. Dr. Evans rushed in, thinking the dog was crashing again, but when he checked the vitals, he realized the dog wasn't dying. He was trying to get up. Titan was trying to get to the door. Sophia looked at the vet and said that Titan knew where her daddy went. She said Titan wanted to go help him. Dr. Evans tried to explain that the dog couldn't walk, but Titan dragged himself to the edge of the cage, ignoring the pain in his broken leg. It was clear that his instinct to protect James was overriding everything else. At the swamp, James had abandoned his car where the road ended and was moving on foot through the thick mud. The sun was setting, casting long, creepy shadows through the cypress trees. He checked his GPS. The coordinates from the notebook were only a few hundred yards ahead. He drew his weapon and moved silently, stepping over rotting logs and stagnant water. In the distance, he saw it, a small, dilapidated cabin that looked exactly like the drawing. The windows were boarded up, and the roof was sagging, but there was a fresh padlock on the front door. James approached the door slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He listened for any sound from inside, but it was dead silent. He used the bolt cutters from his utility belt to snap the padlock. The sound of the metal snapping echoed loudly in the quiet swamp. He kicked the door open and raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a room filled with old, dusty furniture and piles of newspapers. But as he swept the light across the floor, he saw a trapdoor in the corner, partially covered by a rug. James walked over to it and pulled the rug aside. The trapdoor had a slide bolt on the outside, which meant whatever was down there was being kept in, not out. He took a deep breath, slid the bolt back, and lifted the heavy wooden door. A smell of damp earth and stale air wafted up. He shone his light down into the hole, revealing a wooden ladder leading into darkness. James shouted down, identifying himself as a police officer. For a moment, there was silence. Then a small, trembling voice called out from the darkness below, asking if he was the bad man. James felt his knees go weak. It was a child's voice. He scrambled down the ladder, ignoring safety protocol. At the bottom, in a small, dirt-floored room lit by a single battery-powered lantern, sat a girl. She looked older than the picture in the file, her face dirty and her clothes ragged. But James recognized the eyes. It was Sarah. She had been alive down here all this time. James fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, and told her she was safe now. But just as he reached out to help her up, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Above him, the trapdoor slammed shut with a thunderous bang, and the slide bolt scraped into place, locking them both in. James shouted and ran up the ladder, pushing against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. Then he heard a voice from above, not the suspect he had arrested, but a woman's voice. She laughed and said that nobody takes her family away. James realized with horror that the man in the cell wasn't working alone. He had a partner, and James had just walked right into her trap. He was trapped in a hole in the middle of a swamp with a missing girl, no cell service. And nobody knew exactly where he was, except, perhaps, for a dog lying in a hospital bed miles away who was currently fighting with every ounce of his strength to stand up. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoyed this story, I promise you'll surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.